You're going for the light program this weekend?
So, last week we concluded with Mark chapter 6, verse 46, where after the multiplication of the loaves, Jesus leaves the crowd and then he goes up the mountain to pray. But if you read John's Gospel, same chapter 6, after the multiplication of the loaves, Jesus sensed that the people wanted to make him king. There would be a riot and they would somehow get together, the people, and try to crown him king. And therefore, he escapes into the mountains. So here we see Jesus, very clear about his mission. He knows that the Father has sent him to be the suffering servant of Yahweh. And therefore, he would not yield to any human feelings like, suddenly wanting to crown him and divert his attention. And so he escapes into the mountains. And, there are so many things happening politically in Israel that, there is such an uproar against Jesus. Already a lot of scribes and Pharisees have been plotting against him. So many things happening that Jesus decides to spend time in prayer with the Father very quietly. And so he goes up the mountain with a lot of burden in his heart, a lot of things that are really heavy on his head. And so he wants to let it out to the Father, and he goes up to pray.
This is video. No, this what
Can you
is
please mute your mic?
You need access for it. Children came, huh? Children are come? Where are they? They'll start rioting. They'll start rioting, I said. They'll come down, no? The only con.
Rosie, can you mute your mic, please?
Sorry, shall I give you some tea? No, I just had tea. Sure. Bye. Thank you so much. Yeah.
So now Jesus is on the mountain and he has a complete view of the lake of Gennesaret. Now it is sometime around the Passover. If you see the time that Jesus is now going up to the mountain, this season of the year, this part of the year seems to be around Passover time, and a lot of people crowding around. And this evening seems to be a full moon evening. And as Jesus is sitting up on the mountain, he has a complete view of the whole plains and the lake and the sea of Lake of Gennesaret, which is also the Sea of Galilee. And so he says, when evening came, the boat was out on the sea. That is, the disciples are all in the boat, and he was alone on the land. So Jesus is there, and he saw that they were making headway painfully, for the wind was against them. And about the fourth watch of the night, he came to them, walking on the sea. So here you see Jesus, although he is in prayer, and as he is praying, he's looking down, he's finished his prayer, he can see during the fourth watch. What is this fourth watch? There are 4 watches which begin from 6 p.m. to 6 a.m. Every 3 hours is a watch for the Romans. So the fourth watch begins from 3 a.m. 3 a.m. to 6 a.m. is the fourth watch. So you can imagine, 3 o'clock in the morning, Jesus can see, after just as he's finishing his prayer, he can see that the disciples are there far away in the boat and struggling because the wind is against them. And so Jesus comes down and he approaches the sea, and he's just walking past. Here it looks like Jesus is walking on the water. So Jesus is walking on the water and he's passing them by, almost passing them by. But when they saw him walking on the sea, they thought it was a ghost. At that time in the morning, it is very dark, hardly any sunlight because sun will come only after a couple of hours. And so they can see an outline, they can see a silhouette on the sea. And obviously these guys who already been struggling with the water, trying to row, and as they're looking towards the shore, they see a figure, a dark figure, and they're crying out in fear because they think he's a ghost. For they all saw him and were terrified. But immediately he spoke to them and said, "Take heart, it is I, have no fear." So you see, Jesus is approaching the boat very quickly, and as he is approaching the boat, suddenly, since they cannot make out who it is, they are afraid, and then he comes closer, he talks to them, and he gets into the boat. He got into the boat with them, and the wind ceased. See, this is something very beautiful because just a few chapters ago, probably one chapter ago, we just read about Jesus calming the storm. You remember, right? So now again, the second incident where when Jesus gets into the boat, there's a great calm. As long as Jesus was not in the boat, as long as he was outside, these guys were struggling, fighting against the wind. Now, as soon as Jesus gets into the boat, the wind ceases, and they were utterly astounded, for they did not understand about the loaves, but their hearts were hardened. That means they are still on another plane. The disciples have not yet understood who Jesus really is. And so all that Jesus does has not really sunk into them, as it were. And so when Jesus does this miracle, they are astounded, but at the same time, they don't understand who Jesus is. That is why Mark says they did not understand about the loaves, their hearts were hardened. And when they had crossed over, they came to land at Gennesaret and moved to the shore. And when they got out of the boat, immediately the people recognized him and ran about the whole neighborhood and began to bring sick people on their pallets to any place where they heard he was. And wherever he came, in villages, cities, or country, they laid the sick in the marketplaces and besought him that they might touch even the fringe of his garment, and as many as touched it were made well. So Mark is telling us that Jesus was not left alone. Wherever Jesus went, and usually he went in public places like the marketplace, open places, seashore, etc. And wherever he went, Jesus was surrounded by people, milling around him because they wanted some healing. And so they thought even if they touch the fringe of his garment, they will be made well. So that is the kind of faith people had in this rabbi. So Jesus is constantly surrounded by people. That's what we see here. Mark is saying that people, the moment they hear about him, they all come running wherever they are. It's become so popular.
And Nirmal, just in the previous class, we heard about the lady who wanted to touch the fringe of his garment, and she was made healed of 12 years of bleeding. So again, the fringe of the garment.
Yeah,
is just
same.
enough.
Yeah. So people had that kind of faith because they knew this woman, after a healing, would have definitely gone and told everyone what happened to her. So that is why news spreads like wildfire, and everyone wants to touch him. So even if they come close to him, they think they'll be healed. So that's the kind of faith people have. When the Pharisees gathered together to him with some of the scribes who had come from Jerusalem, they saw that some of his disciples ate with hands defiled, that is, unwashed. So here we see now the Pharisees and the scribes are now coming to where Jesus is. They have come from Jerusalem, which means they are the top people in Israel. So they are the kind of leading Pharisees and leading scribes. And so they are following Jesus, and they see that his disciples are eating without washing their hands. So they have a very long tradition from the book of Leviticus about how you should wash your hands, how you should wash your plates, etc. Very ceremonial, very ritual washing. So Pharisees and all the Jews do not eat unless they wash their hands, observing the tradition of the elders. And when they come from the marketplace, they do not eat unless they purify themselves. And there are many other traditions which they observe, washing of cups and pots and vessels of bronze. This Mark is telling us because he is writing to the non-Jews. He is writing to the Romans, so they don't know this custom. So he is explaining to them what the Jews normally do. The Pharisees and the scribes asked him, "Why do your disciples not live according to the tradition of the elders, but eat with hands defiled?" So here comes Jesus face to face with the Jewish leaders. And the leaders are very, very particular about their custom. They are so ritualistic, as it were. And all that matters for them is the ritual. Who you are, what you are, doesn't matter. As long as you follow the Jewish customs, it's fine. So that is how they live. So Jesus says to them, "Well did Isaiah prophesy of you hypocrites, as it is written, this people honors me with their lips, but their heart is far from me. In vain do they worship me, teaching as doctrines the precepts of men." You leave the commandment of God and hold fast the tradition of men. So now there are two things here in the Jewish custom. One is the law, and then you have the bylaws. See, the laws are only 10 commandments, okay? That was given by God, and that was given for the sake of love. Basically love of God and love of neighbor. But the Jews interpreted this and they brought it down to 600 and increased it to 633 bylaws. So they have so many different traditions and laws which are all man-made, and all these man-made laws don't really help anyone, because over a period of time they become meaningless. And therefore when by the time of Jesus, all these things slowly kind of died down. But since Jesus is a rabbi and they want to trap him, they are trying to blame him using his disciples as a bait. And so Jesus uses this powerful word, hypocrite. Who is a hypocrite? A hypocrite is one who lives an entirely false life. Only show. On the outside, you can pretend to be someone, but your heart need not be on what you're saying and doing. That is the real meaning of a hypocrite. Original meaning is a hypocrite is an actor and one who pretends on the stage. But then the meaning extended further to someone who is pretending all his life, even pretending to follow God, but not in his heart. Outside he is pretending. So that is a hypocrite. So that is why Jesus says, Isaiah beautifully talks about you when he says, "You honor me with your lips, but your heart is not here." See, very, very beautiful. Jesus hits the nail on the head very clearly when he says, you're all hypocrites. You do everything that the law or the tradition wants you to do on the outside. We can see you doing everything perfectly, but in your heart, you are not a person who is after God. You're not someone who loves God. So that is very clear by the way you live. So Jesus is able to say that on their face. Just imagine, it's like talking to the archbishop or to the cardinal, telling them on their face. So Jesus is talking to the Jewish leaders. He says, "You're all hypocrites." Imagine the guts he had, but Jesus knew what he was saying. He was so confident of himself that he was able to lash out at them and say, you're not worshipping God in reality. You're only following human tradition, that is all. But in your heart, you have no love for God or love for people. You leave the commandment of God and hold fast the tradition of men. See? He said to them, you have a fine way of rejecting the commandment of God in order to keep your tradition. For Moses said, honor your father and your mother, and he who speaks evil of father or mother, let him surely die. Now this is the commandment. When God had said, honor your parents. But, you see, now comes the human tradition. But, you say, if a man tells his father or his mother, what you would have gained from me is korban. Now this is again an Aramaic word, which means given to God or offered to God, an offering. Then you no longer permit him to do anything for his father or mother. Now a korban is a custom which came later. It is like blackmailing, religious blackmail. This becomes a religious blackmail. So you say, my whole life is now dedicated to God. So whatever I am, whatever I do, will only go to God. Therefore, I will be of no use to my aged parents. They need my help. All that is fine. But then what to do? I've dedicated myself to God. Therefore, I cannot help my parents. I can't do anything for them. Even if they die, they struggle and die, it's their fate. I have to serve God. So that is what this is. So it's a kind of a religious blackmail. So exactly opposite what God told Moses in the 10 Commandments, where he said, honor your father and mother. Now, in what way does Korban honor their father or mother? It doesn't. It only says, I have been born, but then I've been completely given to God. Therefore, don't expect anything from me. Thereby, you don't have that responsibility of taking care of your parents. So this is something very sinful, isn't it? So the Jews, you see how they turned the plan of God into a human plan wherein they could escape this responsibility. So he says, thus you make void the word of God through your tradition which you hand on, and many such things you do. So you see how Jesus attacks them when they talk about ritual purification. So he immediately brings out this point about Korban. And they are not able to answer him. They are unable to answer Jesus. And he called the people to him again and said to them, hear me, all of you, and understand. Now he's telling the people, now he's no longer addressing the leaders. He's telling the people, look, they just came and told you all this, but listen, this is the fact. There is nothing outside a man which by going into him can defile him. But the things which come out of a man are what defile him. So Jesus very clearly tells the people, that dirty hands or eating dirty things will not make you dirty. What will make you dirty is what comes from your heart. With that, Jesus finishes and goes into the house. But his disciples don't understand what he said. So when he entered the house and left the people, his disciples asked him about the parable. And he said to them, then are you also without understanding? Do you not see that whatever goes into a man from outside cannot defile him, since it enters not his heart, but his stomach, and so passes on? So for Jesus, being unclean means having an unclean heart. The body, because of what you eat, gets dirty, but the dirt is washed out when you go to the toilet. Whereas your evil inclinations that are there, they are the things that come from the heart, and they are the things which will constantly make you an evil person. So that is what Jesus is going to say. And he said, what comes out of a person, what comes out of a man is what defiles a man. For from within, out of the heart of man, come evil thoughts, fornication, theft, murder, adultery, coveting, wickedness, deceit, licentiousness, envy, slander, pride, foolishness. All these evil things come from within and they defile a man. See? So, how do you keep yourself pure? Is by not allowing all these evil thoughts to influence us. Because within your heart, all these evil thoughts can come. So a thought is not a good thought or a bad thought, doesn't make you good or bad. The thoughts are all there, good and bad thoughts are there. But if you have to keep them in your mind and let them grow and let them come to fruition, then it is dangerous. That makes you really wicked. It makes you a wicked person through your actions. Because the thoughts that come to you, you can let them go. Thoughts in themselves are not good or bad, because you can get good thoughts, bad thoughts, all kinds of thoughts. That is not a sin. But to harbor it, to mull over it, and to put it to good use by putting it into practice. So you think you have a murderous thought. A thought is murderous, but then you say no, that's not a good thing, and therefore you let it go. It's fine. But then if the murderous thought stays on, it says, no, yeah, I need to murder this person. How do I do it? How do I get slow poison? How do I destroy this person? If you start thinking, then you become a wicked person. So that is where Jesus says the problem is. So the problem is not eating some rubbish, because that rubbish that you eat will again go out. What is dangerous is harboring all these thoughts and letting them grow within you. That will make you a dirty person and an unclean person. So all these evil things come from within and they defile a man. And from there, Jesus arose and went to the region of Tyre and Sidon, that is Lebanon. So he's going outside Israel, he's going to Lebanon. And he entered a house and would not have anyone know it. Yet he could not be hid. So Jesus just wanted some privacy, so he just goes into a house without anyone knowing it. But what to do? People come to know about it. But immediately a woman whose little daughter was possessed by an unclean spirit heard of him and came and fell down at his feet. Okay. So here comes a lady who is a Greek, a Syrophynoecian by birth. So she's a non-Jew. She's heard about Jesus. So she's from another country altogether. And she has faith in Jesus that he can heal her daughter. And she begged him to cast the demon out of her daughter. So her daughter is probably possessed. And so she comes to Jesus with tremendous faith. The daughter is not with her, apparently. It's just the woman who has come. And look at this woman's faith. She asked Jesus to heal her daughter from a distance, because her daughter is back at home. And the lady comes alone and implores. She says, please heal my daughter. Jesus said to her, let the children first be fed, for it is not right to take the children's bread and throw it to the dogs. So the non-Jews, the Gentiles, were called dogs. Okay. So, and the children, who are the children? Children are the Jews, the Israelites. So Jesus is telling her, let my own people first be fed. No, I'm not meant for others. So Jesus is just talking to her playfully. This is not something serious, because the woman understands this kind of language. So there are times when Jesus can be sarcastic, when Jesus can be jovial. After all, he's a human being. He's not talking seriously or theologically all the time. No. So Jesus is telling her, look, I have to first feed the children. I can't feed the dogs first. It seems very harsh. But then this kind of language is something the woman understands, because that was probably common those days. When you refer to children and dogs, people understood. The non-Jews also understood. So she answers him, "Yes, Lord. Yet even the dogs under the table eat the children's crumbs." You see? So the dogs also they are pet dogs. And these dogs are living inside the house in the family, and they also join with the children. They eat whatever falls from the table. So I also deserve a share, right? She says. So she also jests along with Jesus. You see, the woman also is very cooperative. The woman also is a wonderful person. She is able to go along with Jesus, go along with the way he speaks, and she impresses Jesus with her faith. And he said to her, "For this saying you may go your way. The demon has left your daughter." Beautiful, no? Imagine Jesus is casually talking to her. He says, "Okay, just for what you're saying, no, I'm telling you, the demon has left your daughter." No remote. Jesus is healing from a remote. And this woman believes Jesus. And she went home and found the child lying in bed and the demon gone. Imagine what joy this woman must have felt when she saw her daughter. She must have been struggling for a long time, really knowing not knowing what to do, in a very helpless state. We don't know if she had a husband or not. This lady must have been struggling and suffering, and somebody has told her about Jesus. And somehow she finds out and comes running when she hears that Jesus is somewhere in the vicinity. And she implores him, and she will not take no for an answer. And Jesus answers her prayer. Sometimes for us in prayer, we don't take all our troubles to the Lord, especially impossible situations. We say, "Why trouble God?" I don't think even God will be able to answer this prayer, because this is something that is beyond him. This is impossible. So that is what we think, and so very often we don't take impossible situations to the Lord. But I think the Lord delights in handling impossible cases, impossible situations. And when we take it to him in faith, the Lord really rewards our faith. That is what he does to this woman. This woman is now so happy, filled with joy to see her child back to normal. She must have probably spent money also trying to go to magicians and other Greek people, Greek priests, who would have only taken her money away and not done anything, because they don't have the power to do anything. But now she has found the real person, the real person who can heal her daughter, and now the kind of joy that she experiences. And this woman will not stay quiet, obviously. She in turn will become a witness. So, like this, as Jesus goes along, we find there are so many people who have experienced his power, his love, and these people cannot keep it to themselves. That is how Christianity spread far and wide. And so many people experienced the power of Jesus, and so many people came to know him. That is why when we go to all these places, we find such ancient churches are there, ancient faiths, people are there who have faith. All started here, and probably big churches were not built, or big things may not have happened, but definitely those who experienced Jesus continued to share the faith. It's a very beautiful thing. Then he returned from the region of Tyre and went through Sidon to the Sea of Galilee, through the region of the Decapolis. Again, we saw the Decapolis earlier, where Jesus healed this man who had a legion. So he passes through the Decapolis. And they brought to him a man who was deaf and had an impediment in his speech. And they besought him to lay his hand upon him. So a man who is deaf, and therefore he is unable to speak. Because when you don't hear anything, obviously speech will not come. They are connected. Only if you listen to a language can you speak the language. So when you don't listen to anything, what will you speak? Speech doesn't come. Speech comes only by listening. How does a child speak its mother tongue? and not speak some other language, because right from its birth, it's listening to somebody speaking, either the parents, the grandparents, or uncle, aunt, brother, sister, everyone around the child is speaking, and so the child learns the language. So if it is deaf, it doesn't hear anything, and so it cannot speak, and so it doesn't know how to speak or what to say. What language will a deaf man speak? So this man is there, he has an impediment in his speech. And taking him aside from the multitude privately, he put his fingers into his ears, and he spat and touched his tongue. Now we see Jesus healing all kinds of illnesses, all kinds of people with various diseases. But this is something very different, very interesting. Jesus is physically doing something. He's putting his fingers into his ears. Is it really necessary for Jesus to do all this? He could have from a distance healed him. See, when he can heal leprosy, when he can heal somebody who is possessed, why can't he from a distance say, be healed? But he doesn't do that in this case. He puts his finger into his ears. Jesus wants to show that, he is doing something, that this man has to experience something, because this man cannot hear. So when Jesus says something, this man is not going to hear. That's why he has to physically touch him. He's putting his fingers into his ears, you see, because when he does that, his ears will open up. And he spat and touched his tongue. So two things, the ears and the mouth, Jesus touches. And looking up to heaven, he sighed and said to him, Ephatha. What is this sighed? The word used in Greek is glossolalia. Word glossolalia means Jesus groaning in the spirit. That means he was praying in tongues. Jesus here was groaning in the spirit. He prayed in tongues. That is why the word sighed is used. So the actual word is glossolalia, which even Paul will use in his letters, referring to the gift of tongues. So Jesus is praying, he is groaning in the spirit, and he said to the man, Ephatha, that is, be opened. So imagine the command of God. See here again, you see Jesus as God giving this command, be opened. Just as in creation we say, God said, let there be light. No, let there be this, let there be that. Similarly here, be opened. You see, be opened. And his ears were opened, his tongue was released, and he spoke plainly. Now when he spoke plainly means what language did he speak? We don't know. We don't know whether he immediately started speaking Aramaic or Hebrew, but his tongue was loosened. So he was not blah 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 blah, but he was saying something legible, understandable. And so probably, when he received this gift of speaking, automatically he also received the gift of languages, or the language of Aramaic or Hebrew. And so this man begins to speak. So this again is a very powerful miracle. A man who has never heard anything, who has never spoken anything, is now able to speak plainly. Imagine, so many years of schooling we need in order to speak properly. But here comes a man who immediately is able to speak. This is only the power of God. See? And he charged them to tell no one. But the more he charged them, the more zealously they proclaimed it. And they were astonished beyond measure, saying, he has done all things well. He even makes the deaf hear and the dumb speak. So the deaf man is able to hear and speak. That is a real wonder, right? So to be able to speak a language which he has never heard, but he is speaking. Now comes again the multiplication of the loaves a second time in Mark. We saw the multiplication of the loaves two chapters ago, and now again we're going to see the multiplication of the loaves. Now that means this is a true incident that happened more than once, and we see that Jesus is able to multiply, and we see this in all the four Gospels, and in Mark we see it more than once. That means this is something that Jesus did quite a few times, and it really made an impression on the people. So in those days, when again a great crowd had gathered and they had nothing to eat, he called his disciples to him and said, I have compassion on the crowd, because they have been with me now 3 days and have nothing to eat. And if I send them away hungry to their homes, they will faint on the way. And some of them have come a long way. And his disciples answered him, how can one feed these men with bread here in the desert? And he asked them, how many loaves do you have? They said, 7. See, earlier they had 5 loaves, now they have 7 loaves. And he commanded the crowd to sit down on the ground, and he took the 7 loaves, and having given thanks, he broke them and gave them to his disciples to set before the people, and they set them before the crowd. And they had a few small fish. Few fish. There it was 5 loaves and 2 fish. Here it is a few fish. And having blessed them, he commanded that these also should be set before them. And they ate and were satisfied, and they took up the broken pieces left over, 7 baskets full. Last time it was 12 baskets, here it is 7 baskets, because they had only that many baskets with them. And so 7 baskets full of broken pieces they've collected. And there were about 4,000 people. Last time it was 5,000, now it is 4,000 people. And he sent them away. And immediately he got into the boat with his disciples and went to the district of Dalmanutha. See, after a miracle, Jesus gets into the boat and escapes always, because this is a very significant miracle. Like the prophet Elijah, like Elisha, Jesus is doing something remarkable, and these people immediately recognize that he is the prophet from of old. And so they think, okay, here is the Messiah. And so they want to crown him king. They want to somehow, lift him up. And Jesus says, no, this is not the time for me to get into all this. And so he escapes every time. He goes away with his disciples to another place. The Pharisees, you see, they're troubling him all the time. We saw them coming earlier and talking about being unclean, eating with unwashed hands. Now they're coming again. They came and began to argue with him, seeking from him a sign from heaven to test him. So they're not letting Jesus go. He just told them, you fellows are all hypocrites. So they're coming back. They want to argue with him. They want him to give a sign. And he sighed deeply in his spirit. You see, Jesus sighing in the spirit. And he said, why does this generation seek a sign? Truly I say to you, no sign shall be given to this generation. And he left them, and getting into the boat again, he departed to the other side. So Jesus does not answer them this time. He just goes away. He says, I won't give you any sign. So there are times when Jesus will stay and answer. There are times when he finds that it's a waste of time arguing with them. So Jesus does not argue with them. He just says, no, I'm not going to answer your question. I'm not going to give you any sign. And he just goes away. Now they had forgotten to bring bread, and they had only 1 loaf with them in the boat. And he cautioned them, saying, take heed, beware of the leaven of the Pharisees and the leaven of Herod. So here comes again a difficult passage. What is this leaven? So he's now talking about the Pharisees and the Herodians, who are all corrupt, full of corruption, full of extortion. So he refers to them as the leaven, because they are the ones, few in number, who kind of poison the people. It says be careful about them, because they are poisoning the people, and they are telling the people all kinds of things which are contrary to what Jesus is saying. That is why Jesus is saying, you see, you have been with me, you have listened to me, you have seen all that I said, and yet when a situation arises now, when you don't have enough food, he says, you are discussing that you don't have food. Have you forgotten that I am there with you? Have you forgotten all that I said and did? Now you are becoming like these people. You're again, listening to them, and your minds are poisoned, and you're beginning to think like other human beings. That is what he's saying. Beware of the leaven of the Pharisees, the leaven of Herod. Why? And they discussed it with one another, saying, we have no bread. And being aware of it, Jesus said to them, why do you discuss the fact that you have no bread? Do you not yet perceive or understand? Are your hearts hardened? Having eyes, do you not see? And having ears, do you not hear? And do you not remember? When I broke the 5 loaves for the 5,000, how many baskets full of broken pieces did you take up? They said to him, 12. And the 7 for the 4,000, how many baskets full of broken pieces did you take up? And they said to him, 7. He said to them, do you not yet understand? So Jesus is reminding his disciples that they need to have faith in him. But as we can see, the disciples have no faith. They are very poor in their faith. They are with Jesus, they are walking with him, talking to him, spending time with him, and yet their eyes are closed, their hearts are hardened, their minds are dull. They're not able to understand anything. They're just going with Jesus. But all this will dawn on them much later. So this experience is needed. Although they are going about like sheep, they are still somehow depositing all that Jesus said and did in their hearts. And all that will come to the surface one day after Pentecost. And all this will come alive. But till then, they just need this experience of being with Jesus. Although they do not really believe in him, although they don't understand him. And they came to Bethsaida. Some people brought to him a blind man and begged him to touch him. And he took the blind man by the hand and led him out of the village. And when he had spit on his eyes and laid his hands upon him, he asked him, do you see anything? And he looked up and said, I see men, but they look like trees walking. Then again he laid his hands upon his eyes, and he looked intently, and was restored and saw everything clearly. And he sent him away to his home, saying, do not even enter the village. Very strange, isn't it? So there are times when Jesus does miracles differently. So we have to understand that all miracles are not the same. So here is Jesus healing a blind man in stages, in 2 stages. And he does it physically. Remember Bartimaeus, when Jesus looks at Bartimaeus, he says, go your way. Your faith has made you well. And he goes away. But then when we look at John chapter 9, there is a blind man. Jesus puts clay and spittle on his eyes, rubs it on his eyes, and tells him, go and wash in the pool of Siloam. And he goes and washes, and then is able to see. And here we have now a third incident where Jesus is taking him out of the village, spitting on his eyes, laid his hands on him, and then he kind of asks him, do you see? And when he cannot see, he rubs. He lays his hands on him, and then he looked intently, and his eyes was restored. So you see, each case is different. We have 3 different blind cases, and each case Jesus deals with differently. So Jesus knows exactly what to do with each case, and he heals them in different ways. Not all of them receive the same kind of blessing or healing. Each one's healing is different, but nevertheless, all of them are healed. What is needed is basically faith in Jesus. Okay, so in this case, we see that people bring the blind man to Jesus. Blind man doesn't cry out. See, Bartimaeus Remember, the Bartimaeus, blind Bartimaeus, cried out, Jesus, son of David, have mercy on me. Whereas here, people brought the blind man to Jesus and begged Jesus to touch him, just as four men brought a paralytic to Jesus. Paralytic didn't open his mouth. He was quiet. The four men were the one who were imploring. Similarly here, the blind man doesn't say anything. The people around him who brought him, they implore Jesus. They beg Jesus to heal him. So you see, there are different situations like this. And we need to understand that God has his own way of working. We don't question God and say, you worked miracles for that person in that particular way. Why can't you do the same thing for me? Jesus handles every case differently. See? So that is what we need to understand, that God has his own way, own time of working with us, healing us, and restoring us. So we need to allow God to be God, and he will do what he thinks is best for us. And so he tells this man, don't even enter the village. He says, go home straight. So there is a reason why Jesus does this, because Jesus doesn't want to give false propaganda. He wants this man first to go home, because probably there is a problem at home with his family, and this healing will definitely bring about closeness and unity in the family. So Jesus wants him to go home first. Let him be a witness at home first, and then he will be a witness in the village, not the other way around. See? So his priority now is to go home, be reconciled with his family, be united with his family, be a witness there, and then through that witnessing in the family, the whole family will probably be a witness to the entire village. So that is how Jesus sends him away to his home. So each case is different, and we need to understand this. Okay, so I stop with this today. Next class we'll continue with the next passage, where we will see how Jesus is going to ask his disciples, who do you say that I am? So we'll see that in the next class. Okay. Any questions till now?